So I just finished watching Cobra Kai and everything else like that. So with that being said, my sensei, Mr. John Terry, sir. The dojo is yours.
Thank you, sir. I like that music. Yeah. So what if your next step in your business was a misstep? Have you ever given thought to that? You know, every day we're trying to move forward, and this whole week has been about getting you guys together to do one thing, talk about how to take your business to the next level. But if you're not careful in your business and you're not aware of the problems that are out there potentially in your business, or things that you may be doing in your business that you don't realize are sabotaging your own success, you can be actually laying the IEDs and the road mines that literally blow up your business. That's what I want to spend the next few minutes talking about in the time that we've got together. But before we do that, I want to do a couple things. I first off want to recognize the number one guy in the room, Mr. Nick. I know you think about me often, but now that you think about me often, I want you to think about Black Belt leadership as you're drinking your coffee in the morning. Yeah. And every morning when you're having that cup of coffee, you're going, what would John Terry ask me to do? And then you're going to go, wait, I remember what he said last year. Successful people do daily what unsuccessful people do sometimes or not at all. So every day you got to figure out, what am I going to do today to continue to be successful and to continue to grow my business? Exactly what you talked about in your presentation. So a little reminder to do that. Now, also, I want to say thank you. Oh, several of you guys have asked about books. I did bring some books in. I had the valet bring my car up. So if you want to get a book later, I've got several books over there. See me afterwards. But I want to recognize somebody today that, as I looked at the people in the room that were honored today for having the opportunity to up-level their business and being recognized as some of the best in this organization, one individual to me stood out. And here's something I learned a long time ago. Leaders are readers. And if you're not reading every single day, you're missing an opportunity to learn from the collective wisdom of the men and women that have experienced success at some level in their life and add their collective knowledge to your own. Now, to write a book, it takes roughly 2 years to go from creation of that idea to getting that book on paper and getting it through the publishing process and getting it out the door. So reading one book in a month gives you 2 years of wisdom of what it took to pour into that book to get it to come out. So think about how much collective wisdom you can add to your own if you do nothing more than make yourself read for 20 to 25 minutes a day. James Quick, if you don't know the name, I encourage you to look him up, K-W-I-K. James Quick is known as the man with the broken brain. When he was 5 years old in kindergarten, he fell and struck his head on a radiator, physically damaged his brain, and he couldn't learn. He struggled all the way through school until a mentor said, it's not that you can't learn, you just haven't figured out how to learn. Now, Jim taught himself to read with comic books, specifically X-Men comic books and all the comic books that Stan Lee wrote. Today, he is one of the foremost authorities on the brain and on learning and on becoming the very best at memorization and being able to memorize, being able to do photographic reading and speed reading. Phenomenal guy. He had the opportunity not too long ago to be on the set where they filmed the X-Men. And he got a chance to be with all the X-Men actors and actually fly in the X-Jet to go up where they were filming in Toronto. At the end of that time together, he got back to his house, and the director of the movie had a photograph blown up of he with all of the actors. And there's a little note on the bottom of this picture, and it says, Jim, I know your entire life you were looking for Xavier's School of Extraordinary Individuals. He said, this is your graduation photo, and presented that to him. So understanding the power of learning and what it can do and the power of reading, I want to say, Mr. Ben, I want to welcome you to the Learning Library of Black Belt Leadership. Thank you, sir. 6 of my books there. I'll hit you up later for a book report, all right? All right, let's jump right into this and let's get started. 7 common business mistakes. I want to start with one of the smartest men that ever lived, and it's Albert Einstein. Now, Albert Einstein is famously known for saying, if we do the same thing the same way over and over again and expect a different outcome, what is it? It's insanity, all right? Here's another quote that he had, and I think it is brilliant when we think about it. The world we created is a process of our thinking. And if we want to change the world we have created, we can't change it without changing our thinking. Now, every single one of you in this room has created a business. And that business is your world. To change your world and to up-level your world is going to require a different level of thinking to take your business from where it is right now to where you want it to be next year and the year after and 5 years down the road and 10 years down the road. You know, I was listening to Aaron talk today about some of the things that they're doing in this digital space. And what are they doing? Changing the dynamic of thinking, looking at what's changing and how they adapt to it so that he continue to mold and adapt the process he's bringing to you guys to be able to up-level what you're getting in results from what he's bringing to the table. And every single one of you who were talking today, I heard elements of what Einstein was talking about in up-leveling the quality of your thinking. One of the gentlemen that I give an opportunity and I pay good money to speak into my life is a gentleman from the UK by the name of Christian Simpson. And Christian reminds me of this about once a quarter when I get a chance to hear from him. And he's told it to me so many times I've memorized his line and I want to give it to you. He says this: your business and the quality of life that it affords you and your family will never outperform the quality of thinking that you bring to it. Your business and the quality of life that it brings to you and your family will never outperform the quality of thinking that you bring to your business. Therefore, he says, develop the owner and not the business. So out of all the things you're doing to develop your business, if you're not also developing yourself at the same time, stretching your thinking and stretching what you're capable of learning and doing, at some point you're going to hit a lid and that becomes a business misstep in your practice. I think one of the best individuals that ever said that was Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc was able to do what the McDonald brothers were never able to do. They invented this incredible system of hot food delivered fast and inexpensively, but they never could replicate the process. Along comes a milkshake salesman and sees what they're doing, falls in love with the concept, and what does he do? He takes it around the world. I had an opportunity a few years ago to travel to the country of Africa, and I spent 10 days in Zambia and South Africa teaching leadership to pastors and business leaders. And having been in Africa for 10 days and eating what I don't know what I was eating, I was ready to find something I knew what I was about to put in my mouth. Now, one side story I'll give you on that. We're about 7 days in, and the ladies that are at this compound that we're at were cooking. And I walk back and I see these ugly looking fish. And they're cooking these fish heads. And I'm thinking, dear God, we're eating fish heads tonight. And then they said, no, the other rest of the fish is over here. And they filleted the fish and they were cooking the other fish over here. Apparently the Africans wanted the heads and they were going to feed us the bodies, which I was okay with. I'd rather eat that than the other. So I said, what is this? And they said, flying fish. I thought, wow, this is cool. I've never seen a flying fish. I'm taking pictures. I'm texting them to my wife and saying, look, it's a flying fish. Well, I found our interpreter that was there for the event. I said, dude, we're having flying fish tonight. He said, John, there are no flying fish in Africa. I said, well, that's what they told me. So he says, come here. So he takes me over where these ladies are cooking, and he starts speaking to them in Boomba, and then they all start laughing. And they all look at me and they start doing this. And then they turn around and walk off. And I'm like, what? He said, John, they're frying fish, not flying fish. And so again, you never know. But, Ray Kroc invented this. But, end of the story. I fly to, let's see, where did we fly into? We flew into somewhere in the Middle East to go back home. And when I landed in this airport and I walked in and I got off the plane, what did I see? The Golden Arches. And I knew exactly I could go there and get a Big Mac and fries, and I could get me a milkshake, and I knew what I was putting in my mouth. But what did Ray Kroc say? As long as you're green, you're growing. But once you're ripe, you start to rot. The minute you stop growing yourself as a financial professional, the minute you stop growing yourself as a leader, the minute you stop growing yourself as an individual, you're gonna start to rot. And guess what? There's enough rotten financial advisors in this industry we don't need anymore. And that's why I am so glad you guys are in this room, because this organization is committed to helping you not just be the best, but to get to the top and then stay there. And that's something to be applauded. And I think we need to give it up for Tyrone and Al and the fact that they're making this happen every single day. Now, here's something else I want to give you, and this is something I like to do when I'm doing training with corporate America. And when I'm going in to speak to corporate America, I find that in most businesses, and you're going to find this with a lot of your clients, is the fact that they have a closed mind because we're creatures of habit. And once we make up our mind we want to do something, we don't want to change. So part of our job as financial professionals is to help change their mind in such a way that we can bring them an outcome maybe they haven't considered because they don't know what they don't know. So as we go through the rest of this training, I want to give you 3 questions. And I want you, as you're thinking about this, and if you want to incorporate this in your webinars, it's great because it leans into, and what it does is it opens the mind to hearing new information. It literally unlocks something subconsciously in the brain that brings about the opportunity to learn something new. First question is this: what can I learn from what I'm about to hear? Second question: what can I apply as a result of what I've learned? And then the third question: what can I take away from what I just heard that I'm applying and teach to somebody else that hasn't heard it? When you can implement those 3 things in any educational opportunity you're doing and get your clients to lean into those 3 things, they're going to be more open to hear what you have to say, and they're going to be more inclined to positively respond if it speaks to what's important to them. Now, how many of you in the room, if given the choice, would like to have more of this? Anybody in the room not want to be more successful this year than last year? If so, there's the door. All right? I think everybody here wants to be successful, and I believe that's true for all of us. But in the martial arts, we have this thing called the yin and the yang. Now, the yin and the yang means that there's a little bit of good in the bad and a little bit of bad in the good. So if we think about it, as you're being successful, there's a little bitty thing lurking in all that success that is the potential for failure. Stephen, every time you call on a client, do they always say yes? Nope. They don't. So even in that opportunity to be successful, there's still going to be an occasional failure. Now, are there times also, Nick, as you're talking to a client, you think this isn't going anywhere, and I'm never going to have an opportunity to close this individual, and 6 months later they come back and say, you know, Nick, that thing we talked about that wasn't right at the time, I've given it some more thought, and now's the time. What you thought was a failure has now become a success, because even in those failures, when the client says no, there's still an opportunity for them to come back. As long as they stay open to learning and hearing from you, there's still an opportunity to connect. But here's what I'm here to tell you. Missteps in your business can lead to failure. And one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm giving you guys some new content because I'm working on a new book. I did this for you last year, and I wanted to do it again this year. This new book I'm working on is called Master the Art of Business Development. And I've identified 7 key areas in your business practice as an entrepreneur you've got to make sure that you got zeroed in, locked in, and you become a master of if you truly want to scale without a limit. So if you want to be limitless in your business, these are the 10 things you need to do. Tyrone's already seen the outline, and I got 2 thumbs up from Tyrone. So I can tell you right now, this is going to be a bestseller, at least as far as Tyrone's concerned, because he's going to make sure all y'all read this when it comes out. But this is the actual introduction to the book as it currently sits right now, and I want to walk you through these 7 missteps. So I want to encourage you to write these down, and what I want to challenge you to do as I'm walking you through these quickly is to think about, do any of these exist in my business right now? Because if you don't know they're there and you don't recognize and address them, it's that proverbial banana peel that you're going to have the opportunity to step on and ultimately trip yourself up in your business. Now, everybody wants to move forward, but what happens if you step on a banana peel? You're no longer moving forward. At best, you're going to stop and catch yourself, but much more likely, you're going to go the opposite direction. And we don't want to have a banner year in 2024 and then have a so-so or a lackluster or fail in 2025. So what are the 7 common business missteps? Number 1, it is a failure to differentiate. Now, how many financial advisors are in the United States?
I don't know. We're 1,000?
Too many.
How many?
Too many. There's too many.
1.43 million.
1.43 million, according to Tyrone. That's a pretty good number. I was going to say a little over a million. All right? But there's too many out there because most of them aren't really that good at what they do. and they're messing it up for the rest of us. But here's what I can tell you. 95% of those in the financial services industry look and sound exactly alike. Now, as we were listening today, when we were talking about Social Security autonomy, I don't know if your ears perked up like mine did when I was listening to her speak about that. When I heard her talking about Social Security autonomy, my ears went up, and I immediately went to this misstep right here. Because if you go out and somebody says, Nick, tell me what you do, what's your response?
I help other people accomplish their financial goals.
Now, that's a great answer. How do you do that?
By listening.
All right, so Nick has a response that leads to me saying what? How do you do that? If you don't have a response like that, you don't have a differentiator. Most conferences I go to, if I go up and ask that question, I'll come up and say, Nick, tell me what you do. I'm an insurance professional. I'm an investment advisor representative. I'm a Series 7 stockbroker. Well, guess what? So is everybody else that has those same designations, and there is no differentiator. If you're not differentiating yourself in your marketing, if you're not doing things that allow you to stand out and be unique and different in the marketplace, you're seen by the public as just like everybody else. And if you're seen just like everybody else, you get lumped in with those 95% of financial professionals that are average, mediocre, lackluster at best, and they don't believe that you can do any better for them than what they're already getting right now, and they're not about to change. So how do we address this issue right there? How do we address this failure to differentiate? You've got to answer this question in your marketing, in your conversations with your client, and in everything you do in your branding so that you've got an opportunity to be seen as unique and different in the marketplace. Aaron, would you agree with that statement?
100%.
Why would you agree with that statement?
This is what's going to drive results.
And drive results is what?
Well, it depends on what you're doing.
But it's more money, right? More success. That's where we're trying to go. If you haven't yet figured out how to answer that question, what makes you unique or different, you need to get with Nick or somebody like Nick, because that was a great line. Because when he said that question, what did it immediately prompt me to do? Well, how do you do that? Because guess what? That helps you lean into and speak to your ideal customer prospect that you want to spend time working with, that is more likely to invest and work with you and help you create solutions to the money problems that they have. And if you do not have a differential statement, that is misstep number one in your business. Number two is poor planning and poor management. Where I typically see this is a failure to manage time. I was just in an advisor's office 2 weeks ago, and I was having a conversation with them, talking to them about the roadblocks in their business. And about every 10 minutes into the conversation, he would hear his phone ding. And the minute he heard his phone ding, he would stop the conversation, or even as I'm talking, he picks it up and begins to look at his phone. He would hear his buzz go off for his email, and he would lean over to see who was emailing him. He was so distracted with all these busy things that he was doing, he was not being efficient and effective with his time. How much time do you have when you get up today, Stephen? How many hours do you have today? Today. How many hours do you get? 24. How many hours do you get today? Same 24. How many hours do you get today, Steve? Steve?
I get 18.
You get
I
8.
sleep.
Okay, but you still got 24. Yeah. What you do with it is up to you, right? Yep. We all have the same 24 hours a day. But the problem with unsuccessful people is they don't manage the 24 hours they have. Now, one of the things I learned years ago from Warren Buffett to be able to get more things done in less time is Warren Buffett has this idea that he has called the rule of 3. And every morning when Warren Buffett gets up, he takes a piece of paper and he draws a line right down the middle of it. On the left-hand side, he makes a list of everything he has to do today. And then having made a list of everything he has to do, he identifies the top 3 things that are most important that have to get done today, and he moves them to the right-hand side of the column. And then he spends the rest of his day working on just those 3 things. And when those 3 things get done, he goes back to the left-hand side, he finds the next 3, and he moves them over. And doesn't do anything else until those 3 are done. And I begin to study and look at that practice, and it makes sense. And if you do the math and the analysis on it and looking at people that are engaging in a similar philosophy, they get more things done in less time because they're able to focus their attention on what matters most. And if you're not managing the time that God gives you every single day, you're mismanaging the opportunity because you never get those days back. You never get those hours back. That is the one commodity that we all have in limited supply. So the question here is this. What is your business strategy for success? If you were to map out specific times of the day, I'm going to check email between 8 and 9 in the morning. I'm going to check email between 1 and 2, or I'm going to check email at the end of the day. And outside of that, I'm not going to answer your email. If you're going to call me, I'll take phone calls between this time and these times. Other than that, I've got specific blocks of times I'm doing specific things. Because if you don't give your calendar a job to do, your calendar is going to take over and it's going to destroy your opportunity to see success. So what's the third one? If you've got employees, poor motivation or no employee motivation. I went into an IMO organization, and I won't say in what part of the country because Tyrone will probably figure it out. But when I walked in and I'm visiting with the staff, half the staff was playing games. They were goofing off. They were in no way really motivated. They had a number of calls they had to make, and it was pulling teeth to get them to actually make the outbound calls they required to do every day to try to get a hold of guys and gals just like y'all to see if they could recruit them into their organization. And as I noticed that, I began to talk to the folks. There was no motivation. There was no inspiration. Not a single one of them understood the company culture and what that IMO believed in and what the founder envisioned when he started that organization over 15 years ago. Everybody was doing his thing or her thing because from the top down, there was no purpose being given. There was no vision being given. There was no guidance being given. So everybody there created their own idea of what the business should look like. They were struggling with sales, their numbers were dropping, and they couldn't figure out why. It was because they were not motivating their people for success. They were not explaining their why, and were not giving them a reason to get on the phone and to make the calls necessary for success. So what do you got to do? If you've got employees, you got to get them engaged, and you got to keep them engaged. How do you do that? If they don't understand your why you started this organization, and I heard some great stories today. You know, Steve shared a great story. Nick shared a great story. Heard a great story right here as well from people that have been moved to do what they do. You know, I think about one of the reasons when I got in the financial services industry years ago, mine was Miss Thelma, my Sunday school teacher, when I was a little bitty boy. I got older and began to work in the estate planning arena and was doing an estate planning workshop for our church. Her family kept coming to me and saying, John, we've got a family farm and all our money's tied up in the family farm and Mom's getting sick, Mom's getting old, and Mom's having some issues. We need to do something so we can protect this family farm. So I began to talk about estate planning and long-term care planning and all the other assets of retirement planning that we all engage in. And at the end of that workshop at the church, Miss Thelma came up, and from the time I was a little kid, she'd always pat me on the head. Miss Thelma came up, and she reached up and she patted me on the head. She said, "Little John, that was a really good talk." She said, "That was just some really good information. Thank you for sharing that." And I said, "Miss Thelma, your kids are begging you to take action on what we talked about today." And she says, with a smile, "The good Lord's always taking care of me, and the good Lord always will." I said, "Miss Thelma, I understand the good Lord's always taking care of you, and He always will, but He's not going to do for you what He expects you to do for yourself." And she looked at me and smiled. She says, "It'll be okay." Until 6 months later, when she had a stroke. And she ended up in the nursing home with no money to pay for care. And until she died 18 months later, every month they had to sell at least 1 acre of the family farm to pay for care. And by the time they were done, almost half the family farm that had been in the family for generations was gone. That was my why. And the folks that worked with me and for me understood my why. And if the folks that work for you don't, when you go home today, you need to make that mission number 1 on Monday, that they understand your why. Poor customer satisfaction. If your customers don't like what you're doing for them and you don't know it, guess where they're going? To your competition. Nick says they're going to him. We've heard those stories today. You know, as we've talked about, we've heard several stats about, you know, people that don't have an advisor, or all these advisors that are looking for an opportunity to go get somebody else's client. That happens every single day. And we heard some of the stories and strategies they use. But the number one reason for poor customer satisfaction is this. When you meet with them, they say, this is what I want to accomplish. And they lay out their goals, their dreams, their objectives for you. And if you meet those, but that's all you do, that's only the minimum. Meeting their expectation is the floor. You've got to find a way to not just meet their expectations, but to exceed their expectations. Because here's what I can tell you as an expert in the field of human behavior. Every single day when your clients wake up, there are 6 to 8 money issues going on in their head. And they're thinking about these all day, every day as they're thinking and going through their day. Only one of those is mission critical right now. But as soon as you solve that money problem, guess where their thinking goes to? Problem number 2. And if you haven't identified what those other issues are so that you can not just meet their immediate expectations, but exceed it and start thinking about how do I help them next, you're only meeting the minimum and you don't have the opportunity to exceed those expectations. So how do you find out how well you're doing? It's very simple. You ask them, how am I doing? After you meet with them at the end of a presentation, at the end of a meeting, at the end of an annual review, tell me about our meeting time today. Did I meet your expectations? Is there anything you would have liked me to do that I didn't do that I make sure I do next time so I meet and exceed what you came into this office or we met over the phone or met over Zoom to get done today? And when you begin to ask your clients those questions and ask them pointedly, am I doing what you asked me to do? Am I following through with everything I said I would? Am I meeting everything you've asked me to do and then some more? And listen to their feedback. They will tell you everything you need to know to be able to serve them at a higher level. If you're not doing that, that is a misstep in your business. Now, the next one is insufficient resource allocation. We've heard about a ton of tools and resources. I was taking notes so fast when Aaron was talking in the back, I thought my pen was going to run out of ink. There's a lot of stuff you guys have built that's just absolutely amazing. But here's the question I've got. If they've got all these tools and they don't use them, how good are they? It's like having all of these amazing tools in your toolbox and then you got a water line break and you just let the tool sit in your toolbox and the water floods your house. If we don't take the resources that we have available and learn to apply them to our business, they're absolutely of no use to us in what we do. And not only do we have to use them, we have to learn how to use them efficiently and effectively. Now, it goes back to what I talked about the last time I was here. That may not be your area of expertise. I mean, I love all the gadgets and things, but when it comes down to figuring out marketing stuff, I'm going to go to a guy like this because I understand enough about it to be dangerous. But if I want somebody doing my Facebook, my LinkedIn, and other advertising, I want to go to somebody that really knows it. Remember, the most successful people in the world spend 80% of their day doing the 20% of things they're best at doing. And they assign those tasks to somebody else, or they hire somebody else that's an expert to do that. That's how you become an expert in resource allocation and doing what you need to do. So as you're looking at the tools that you've got available, is it the best use of this tool and resource? Is this the best use of my time in doing this process, or do I need to give it to the lady in back that I've heard her name mentioned so many times today? You're going to have to clone yourself about 5 times, Leslie, to be able to do everything that we need you to do, all right? So y'all got to come up with a cloning machine, Al. Otherwise, she's going to be in trouble, all right? So is this best use of your time, and are you using the resources you've got available to you? Which leads me to the next one, rigid and outdated systems. I visited recently an investment advisor's office. They have a CRM system that was created in the 1980s. It will not interface with Outlook. It will not interface with Calendly. It will not interface with any of the tools we have available today, and all of their processes are manual. And he's wondering why he's only doing $1 million or $2 million a year in assets under management, adding to what he's doing, and nobody wants to do business with him. You walk in his office and it looks like my uncle's CPA office from the 1970s. I mean, the furniture's old, the fixtures are old, everything in that place looks old. Well, we heard it talked about, Nick was talking about it earlier, he's up-leveling the experience, because if your stuff looks old and worn out, guess what? That subconsciously sends a message to the client. You're old and worn out. You're not keeping up with the times. You don't know what's going on. And as a result of that, you're not the person I want to hire. So what do? You've got to ask yourself, is there a better way? Looking at all the tools and technologies that are out there today, it's amazing. I have a good friend by the name of Jim Edwards. He was the copywriter for Dan Kennedy. Dan Kennedy is considered the godfather of direct response marketing. And Jim has been working with machine learning, AI, and Jim has developed this amazing tool that he can interview you with about 12, 14 questions, and he will create all of this content that you can then use in your marketing to be able to understand how to speak to your ideal client. It will even evaluate it in terms of their DISC profile so that you can understand how to speak directly to their personality. Amazing tools like that exist, but if we're still doing the same thing with the same way over and over again, guess what we're going to get? The very same outcome. All right, here's the last one. Lack of forward thinking. Now, what do I mean by this? Exactly what I just said. If we do the same thing the same way over and over again and think something's going to change, we're in for disappointment. And I like to say it this way. If you do the same thing you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. If you do what the 95% of average, mediocre, lackluster guys and gals are doing, you're going to get the very same results they've got. But to get ahead, to have an opportunity to see success, what do you have to do? You have to stretch your thinking. And it takes me back to what we talked about earlier. You got to ask yourself, what's next? If you want to take the next big step in your business, what's next for you? If you want more of this, understand that even in success, there's an element of failure that can mess you up, but now you know the 7 missteps that can trip you up if you're not aware. And with that, let me say thank you for your time. Pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, my friend.
Sir. 1, 2, 3.